Okay, so we're moving on to our last case study, and that is the story of James. James is a college athlete. This is actually sort of a realistic situation. It is based on reality, and it affects athletes all over the country. So James is an 18-year-old college student. He's been recruited to play football for a Division I school, and if you were uninitiated, as I was, you might be interested to know that Division I schools are considered sort of feeders to the professional sports organizations like the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, etc. The NCAA, which regulates college sports, mandates testing for sickle cell trait for all athletes who participate in competitive sports, not intramurals, because that's just for fun. But the NCAA mandates testing for sickle cell trait. James is healthy and does not understand why he needs this test. Let's say he has no family history and no personal history with sickle cell anemia. He's concerned that a positive result could impact his status on the team and decrease his chance of being drafted for professional NFL teams in the future. You're a nurse working for College Health Services. So let's see what you understand about this disorder and see if we can fill in any gaps. So you've watched enough lectures and you've been through peds and you understand that sickle cell anemia is an autosomal recessive disorder, meaning two recessive alleles combine and they code for red blood cells that are sometimes sickle shaped. They have that crescent moon shape. This results in a painful, debilitating illness. Okay? Most individuals with sickle cell trait are asymptomatic carriers. So if they have the trait but not the disease, most of them will be asymptomatic. This is where Mendelian inheritance kind of doesn't explain everything. In this case, under extreme stress or physical exertion, some carriers of the sickle cell trait will experience sudden, life-threatening collapse. It's a cardiac event. That recessive allele that is supposed to sit in the corner and stay quiet all of a sudden causes trouble. And this is like extreme sports, dehydration, extreme physical exertion, tough mudder races, that kind of thing. Training in football practice. This can be prevented by identifying the risk through genetic screening, knowing the signs and symptoms of decompensation, and modifying a training schedule so that people aren't put under that extreme stress. But it requires that you not only test, but you disclose your test results. Okay, under federal law, athletes cannot be banned from participation in sports based on the results of their genetic testing. That's the law. The NCAA echoes that position. However, before we get to this question, James' concern is not completely unfounded. And we have talked about the movie Gattaca in terms of discriminating against people according to their genetic testing results. So in college athletics, there's big money, it's high stakes. Professional ball, that's another high stakes game. And people can discriminate without knowing it by not allowing players to play, or if they hear something, maybe they have second thoughts about drafting that player. I mean, little things like having a twisted ankle in the off season sometimes are enough to spook coaches and agents and players. And so James's concern is not completely unfounded. So keep that in mind when we start to talk about ethics, because we are going to revisit James. Let's go back and talk about what we know about Mendelian inheritance patterns and sickle cell trait. So we have this question: which of the following couples could have a child with sickle cell trait? Select all that apply. You might need some paper and a pencil to do a Punnett square. If you need to pause this video, please do so. We have in option A mother and father who both have sickle cell anemia. They both suffer from the disease. They are both homozygous recessive. In option B, we have a mother who carries the trait and a father who does not carry the trait. Heterozygous, homozygous dominant. One copy of the allele that's affected. Option C, a mother who has sickle cell anemia and a father who is heterozygous, one recessive allele. And option D, a mother and father who are homozygous dominant. So take your time with that if you need to. But the correct options were B and C. So the gene that codes for sickle cell we know is considered to be recessive. I know this is a little redundant. We've heard it before, but to have sickle cell anemia, you generally need 2 copies of the gene. And that's a pretty serious situation. Rarely do we see people who both have sickle cell anemia and decide to have babies and end up with all children affected by this disease, because the only alleles they have to pass on are all recessive and code for that sickle-shaped red blood cell. None of them will be asymptomatic carriers, so they won't carry the trait. So A is out. They cannot create a carrier. D is out because they're homozygous dominant. There are no recessive alleles to pass on. B and C, those situations are just variations of a theme. We have people who are carriers, people who have the disease. Anybody who has the allele can pass it on. And if there is a dominant allele in there, there is the possibility that you will have a heterozygous person with sickle cell trait. And we're going to revisit James's story when it comes time to discuss ethics. We're going to talk a little bit too about ethnicity and race and sickle cell testing, because it is more common in African American populations. Few people in the Mediterranean ancestry groups and other groups as well. But the NCAA does not discriminate along racial or ethnic lines when it comes to sickle cell testing. And that is actually probably a premier example of how genetic testing could be used to discriminate against people. It makes very interesting ethical issues. All right, and that is the end of our case studies. Have a great week. Take your rat. It's not ready yet. It will be soon. Oh, it might be by the time you watch this video, but anyway, talk to you later.